They say every wedding needs a memorable moment. Ours arrived palm first. The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses flew, skated across the polished floor of the Grand Boston Hall, and exploded into a constellation of prescription stars under a chandelier worth more than my car, my decoy car. Anyway, 130 guests fell into a silence so complete you could hear the string quartet lose their place. My cheek burned, but the ache in my chest did the real screaming. Vanessa Moore, my brand new daughter-in-law in snow-white silk, had just slapped me on her wedding day because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being selfish," she announced, tilting her tiara as if cruelty were a crown. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." No one moved, not the bridesmaids, rhinestoned and rehearsed, not the ushers, suddenly fascinated by their cufflinks. Even the bartender froze mid-shake. A silver comet of martini arcing back into its shaker like time rewinding for someone nicer. I crouched, fingers trembling, collecting the broken pieces of myself disguised as lenses. Daniel, my son, her husband, my heart's long project, studied the parquet floor as if the answer to morality had been inlaid in oak. "You're not welcome here anymore," Vanessa added, smoothing a gown so pristine it made virtue look machine-washed. "We need privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect while we shop for something better." Venom in satin. Boston sees it all the time. We just usually call it networking. For months I'd swallowed her comments about my thrift store dresses, my decade-old sedan, my part-time job at the neighborhood flower shop. "I like roses. They bite back." But tonight she crossed a line, and I felt something inside me tilt, like a picture frame finally hanging straight. I rose slowly, every cell aware of the eyes on me, eyes that flinched. Judged, or simply calculated which side of the story would look better on Instagram. My name is Eleanor Grant. I am 68 years old, and being underestimated is my favorite camouflage. I slipped my cracked frames into my purse, a black, scuffed veteran of 5 winters, and walked past centerpieces taller than common sense. The air conditioning was a crisp insult on my stinging cheek. Somewhere behind me a cousin whispered, "Poor thing," and someone else replied, "She should be in assisted living." Lovely. Nothing says family like a group project on appropriating your mother's square footage. In the lobby, under a portrait of men who'd bought their dignity wholesale, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number my fingers knew better than prayer. Richard Coleman. A voice answered, calm, precise, and very expensive. "Richard, it's Eleanor," I said, surprised by how steady I sounded. "Come to the Grand Boston Hall. Bring the documents." A beat. "Are you certain, Mrs. Grant? Once we do this, there's no going back," I finished. 30 minutes. I hung up and pushed through the doors into the September night. The city hummed, ambulances far off. A taxi coughing to life. The ocean sending up the faintest rumor of salt. I crossed to my sedan, faithful, unflashy, and paid off, and sat with my hands on the wheel. Counting my breaths. I had chosen discretion for decades. I had worn it like a coat. But coats come off. Memory unspooled, sharp as the glass in my bag, the first visit 2 years ago. Vanessa's polite frown at my second-hand couch. The phone call I overheard, "Mom. It's in a prime neighborhood. If I get her to downsize," the brochures for active senior communities fanned across my coffee table like a tarot reading for the gullible. And always, Daniel, nodding in time to the metronome of her ambition. "I am not cruel. I am not vindictive. I am tired of being harvested." Headlights washed over the lot. 27 minutes. I called Harold Bennett, my neighbor, the kind of 70-year-old who still believes morning coffee is a civic duty. "Harold, could you grab the brown folder in my desk?" "Second drawer." "Yes, the boring one." While I waited, the band inside struck up something jubilant. Laughter drifted out like the smell of burned sugar. Upstairs, a life I financed with quiet transfers and quieter love kept celebrating the death of its shame. I breathed in, counted to 5, and felt the balance of the night tip in my favor. I had spent years making everyone comfortable, everyone but myself. That ended at 8:43 p.m., under a chandelier and a lie. Harold's figure appeared, steady under the streetlight, the brown folder tucked against his ribs. He handed it over. squeezed my shoulder, and said, "About time, Ellie." I smiled. Eleanor for judgment, Ellie for truth. I opened the folder. Paper doesn't look like power until it does. Richard's car turned into the lot right then, sleek, dark, and final, and as he stepped out with a leather brief, I knew the next 30 minutes would rewrite every story they'd ever told about me. Richard's car slid into the lot like a black chess piece taking its place on the board. Even from a distance, he radiated precision, pressed suit, polished shoes, briefcase tucked under his arm as if it contained both salvation and damnation. Which, in a way, it did. "Mrs. Grant," he greeted me, his tone respectful but edged with gravity. "Are you entirely certain? Once we open this folder, the curtain never closes again." I met his eyes, steady now, the tremble gone from my voice. "Richard, I've been rehearsing this moment for years without knowing it. Tonight they wrote my lines for me." He gave a single, approving nod. "Then let us begin." I glanced back at the Grand Boston Hall. Through the glowing windows, laughter burst like champagne corks. Vanessa's silhouette, white, triumphant, spun across the dance floor. The new Mrs. Grant parading her prize. My son at her side, eyes dim as if battery operated. A perfect tableau of victory. If only they knew the electricity was about to be cut. Harold lingered a few feet away, arms folded like a bouncer for dignity. "Ellie," he said in his gravelly voice, "once you walk back in there, you'll either be a legend or a lunatic." "I'd wager on legend." I smirked. "You've always had good odds." "Harold." Richard flipped open his briefcase under the amber streetlight. Inside, deeds, statements, notarized documents, each sheet whispering the truth of who I really was. Millions in investments, properties no one suspected, transfers to Daniel's accounts, 3 years of quiet rescue disguised as bonuses. The invisible scaffolding holding up their cardboard empire. I touched the papers, my fingers tracing the ink like scripture. These were more than numbers, they were years of sacrifice, of hiding so that greed wouldn't sniff me out. Yet here it was, wearing a wedding gown and a smug smile. Richard studied me carefully. "Once you show them this, the narrative flips. They'll call you cruel, cold, calculated. They already call me weak, senile, selfish," I replied, snapping the folder shut. "I prefer cruel to disposable." He chuckled softly, the lawyer's laugh of someone who rarely gets surprised. "Very well, let's go dismantle a fairy tale." We walked toward the glowing doors. Richard on one side, Harold a silent shadow on the other. My heels clicked on the pavement. A metronome counting down to detonation. Inside, I knew 130 people waited with champagne glasses half full and opinions fully loaded. Vanessa believed she'd won the war with one slap. Daniel thought silence was loyalty. The guests thought they were attending a wedding. They were about to witness an execution. The moment the ballroom doors opened, every eye turned toward us. Confusion rippling like wind through wheat. Vanessa's smile faltered. Daniel's face drained of color. And Richard, calm as an undertaker, cleared his throat to speak. The double doors groaned as they swung open, spilling light across the polished marble. Conversation died mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. Even the violinist, bow lifted, froze like a statue in the corner. 130 pairs of eyes landed on us, on me. Cheeks flushed but spine straight. Flanked by Richard Coleman, cool as courtroom marble, and Harold Bennett, who looked ready to headbutt anyone who breathed wrong. Vanessa's smile faltered first. Her laugh snagged in her throat like cheap fabric catching on a nail. "What are you doing back here, Eleanor?" she snapped, clutching Daniel's arm as though my 68 years and a purse could possibly be a threat. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough for one evening?" Daniel shifted, loosening his tie, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. The boy who once begged me to read him bedtime stories now couldn't summon the courage to meet my gaze. Richard stepped forward with the kind of calm authority that makes juries sit straighter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying over the chandeliers. "Forgive the interruption. I am Richard Coleman, legal counsel for Mrs. Eleanor Grant. I have urgent matters to address with Mr. Daniel Grant and Mrs. Vanessa Moore." The room inhaled as one. A collective gasp disguised as etiquette. Cell phones tilted upward like sunflowers following the light. eager to capture what promised to be a scandal fit for legend. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh, too high-pitched to fool anyone. This is absurd. She gestured at me with a flourish of manicured nails. An old woman having one of her episodes. An episode? Harold barked from behind me. His voice boomed louder than the string quartet had all night. You call a slap across the face an episode? Because I call it assault. A ripple of whispers washed across the ballroom. Guests craned their necks, torn between pity and voyeurism. Vanessa's cheeks flushed scarlet, her tiara tilting as if even gravity had grown tired of her act. Daniel finally spoke, his voice thin, unsteady. Mom, maybe this isn't the place. On the contrary, I cut in, my words sharp enough to slice through his cowardice. This is exactly the place. You humiliated me in public. You will hear the truth in public. And with that, Richard clicked open the brown folder. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. He pulled out the first document, ink, seal, signature, and the ballroom leaned in. Vanessa's smirk evaporated. Daniel's hands began to tremble. And for the first time all night, I felt the sting on my cheek fade, replaced by something fiercer, justice sharpening its blade. Richard adjusted his glasses, his tone steady as granite. Mr. Grant, Mrs. Moore, this is a notice of cancellation. The financial guarantee for your current lease, which your mother privately secured, is hereby revoked, effective immediately. The ballroom murmured. A few guests gasped audibly. Daniel blinked, his Adam's apple bobbing like a buoy in a storm. Financial guarantee? He stammered, glancing at me as though the word were written in a language he'd never learned. Yes, Richard continued crisply. For the last 3 years, Mrs. Grant has acted as your invisible safety net. Rent payments, credit card bills, car insurance, even certain indulgences. He tapped the page, all covered, quietly, without acknowledgement. Vanessa's laugh cracked like brittle glass. That's impossible. Look at her. She shops at thrift stores. She drives that prehistoric sedan. She works in a flower shop. How could she possibly? Appearances, I interrupted, my voice low but carrying, are the best disguise money can buy. The silence that followed was heavy. Delicious. I could feel 130 necks pivoting toward me, curiosity bright in their eyes. Vanessa's painted smile flickered, panic breaking through her practiced disdain. Richard lifted another paper, his voice merciless. Here is the record of monthly transfers, $4,500. Deposited regularly into your joint accounts. Over 3 years, that totals $162. A low whistle escaped from somewhere near the back of the room. The ballroom tilted as if the floor had shifted. Daniel's lips parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. Vanessa, however, lunged toward me, her gown dragging like a wounded beast. You're lying. You're senile. That's what you are. She's trying to ruin us because she's jealous. Gasps, murmurs, cell phones tilted higher. The performance had officially become primetime. I stepped forward, my cheek still tingling but my heart steady. Jealous. Vanessa? Of what? Your debt? Your rented luxury? Or your talent for humiliating the very person who's been paying your bills? The guests erupted in whispers so loud they might as well have been shouts. Someone muttered, "My God, she's been funding them all along." Another whispered, "And they treated her like that?" Richard closed the folder with a sharp snap. Shall I continue, Mrs. Grant? I looked at Vanessa, mascara trembling on her lashes. And at Daniel, pale as parchment. Yes, I said, by all means, let's continue. Richard reached for the thickest document yet, pages bound with clips. Fat with figures and seals. The guests leaned forward, breathless. This wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a trial, and the verdict was about to fall. Richard slid the thick bundle of papers free, the sound of metal clips scraping like the opening of a vault. He held it up so the chandelier light glinted off the embossed seals. This, he said, is a comprehensive record of Mrs. Grant's private accounts and assets. Assets you both were never meant to know about until tonight. The ballroom went still. The string quartet lowered their instruments completely now, bows dangling like surrender flags. Daniel's jaw slackened. Vanessa, however, doubled down, as if volume might drown out truth. Stop this circus. She's just a bitter old woman with delusions. None of this is real. She's making it up because, her words faltered as Richard snapped open the summary page and began reading aloud. Property portfolio. 1 downtown office building valued at $12.5 million. Generating rental income of approximately $50,000 per month. 1 oceanfront home in Cape Cod. Valued at $3.2 million. Liquid investments. $5.4 million across multiple accounts. Total assets, he paused, letting the number hang like a guillotine. Just over $21 million. The ballroom gasped as one. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker in disbelief. Daniel swayed, clutching the back of a chair as though gravity had betrayed him. "Mom?" His voice cracked, small, childlike. "All this time?" I met his eyes for the first time all evening. "All this time, Daniel. Your father and I chose to live modestly. We believed visible wealth attracts vultures. Tonight, I see we were right." Laughter rippled through a corner of the room, not mocking me, but mocking them. Guests exchanged looks, some biting their lips to hide smirks. Vanessa's tiara tilted further, as though even it had lost faith in her. "This is absurd," she shrieked, stomping in satin. "If she's rich, why does she live like a pauper? Why would anyone work in a flower shop with that kind of money?" I let a slow smile curve across my lips. "Because unlike you, Vanessa, I don't measure worth by the price tag on my shoes. And because roses," I paused, savoring the silence, "have thorns." A ripple of laughter burst from the guests, sharp and uncontrollable. Even Harold chuckled, muttering, "Good one, Ellie." Vanessa's face contorted, rage simmering under mascara streaks. She turned to Daniel. "Say something, do something." But Daniel stood frozen, the reality of years of silent manipulation crumbling around him. His silence was louder than her screams. Richard cleared his throat again, producing one final sheet. "Shall I tell them about the wedding expenses, Mrs. Grant?" I nodded. "Go ahead. They deserve the full story." Richard raised the paper high, his voice booming. "Tonight's wedding, every flower, every plate, every note of music, was financed not by this couple, but by Mrs. Grant herself. And as of this moment, payment has been cancelled." Gasps turned to chaos. Glasses clinked, chairs scraped, and the fairy tale began to implode. The ballroom seemed to inhale and choke at the same time. A glass shattered somewhere near the back. One guest let out a nervous laugh that quickly died when Vanessa's scream sliced through the air. "You can't do that," she shrieked, stomping forward, silk gown swishing like an angry tide. "You can't just cancel a wedding. This is my day." Richard didn't flinch. "Correction, Mrs. Moore, it was your day. But the financial guarantee for this event was Mrs. Grant's signature, and she has withdrawn it. The ballroom, the catering, the flowers, the orchestra, all require immediate payment." The manager, a burly man in a black vest, materialized at the edge of the crowd. His frown looked like it had been waiting all night for a reason to appear. "Is this true?" he asked Richard, though his eyes flicked nervously toward me. Richard handed him the official notice. "As of 15 minutes ago. Yes, services rendered tonight are no longer guaranteed by Mrs. Grant." Gasps turned into full-blown whispers. Guests clutched purses, checked watches, some already drifting toward the exits with the subtle urgency of people escaping a sinking ship. Daniel's face drained of all remaining color. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, "please, you can't do this. There are people here, photographs, reputations." I cut him off, my voice steadier than I felt. "Reputation, Daniel? You stood there while your wife slapped me across the face. You let her call me useless, selfish, disposable. That was the moment you ruined your reputation, not me." The room buzzed louder, a live current of judgment. Several phones were raised now. Recording. Vanessa spun in a circle, her mascara running like black rivers. "You're all fools. She's manipulating you. She's just a lonely old hag with nothing better to do." "Funny," Harold muttered from behind me, loud enough for half the room to hear. "That lonely old hag seems to own more property than the entire Moore family combined." A ripple of laughter cut through the tension. Vanessa shrieked, her hands clawing at the air. Daniel reached for me desperately. "Mom, we can fix this. I swear. Just give me another chance." I stepped back, holding his gaze. "The only thing broken here is your integrity. Daniel, and I can't fix that for you. The manager cleared his throat. His voice firm. Mr. and Mrs. Grant, unless someone provides an alternative payment method, this event will be suspended. Immediately, the weight of those words dropped like an anvil. Gasps, whispers, shifting feet. Vanessa's tiara slipped sideways, she yanked it off and hurled it to the floor. Daniel looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy, wide, wet, pleading. Mom, he said, voice breaking, if you ever loved me, please don't let this end like this. The ballroom leaned in, waiting for my answer. For the first time that night, I felt my heart wobble. Daniel's eyes, those same eyes that once lit up over birthday cakes and bedtime stories, were now pools of desperation. But desperation born of greed is a poor imitation of innocence. If I ever loved you? I echoed, my voice low but slicing through the silence like a violin's highest note. Daniel, I loved you every day for 35 years. I loved you when you broke your arm climbing the neighbor's fence. I loved you when you flunked your first college exam and cried in my kitchen at 2 in the morning. I loved you when your father died. And I carried us both through the grief. My throat tightened, but I forced the words through. I still love you, but love is not the same as submission. And it is not a license for betrayal. A wave of murmurs swept the ballroom. Some guests dabbed at their eyes, others stared at Daniel with open disgust. Vanessa, however, was not moved. She stomped forward, gown dragging like a wounded animal. Oh, spare us the sob story. You're just jealous because Daniel chose me. You hate that you're not the center of his life anymore. I tilted my head, studying her like a rare insect. Jealous? Vanessa, darling, I have lived a full life, more than you could imagine. Why would I be jealous of debt collectors knocking at your door? Or a marriage built on manipulation? Laughter bubbled from the back of the hall. Uncontrolled this time, Vanessa spun toward the sound. Her cheeks crimson. Shut up, all of you. Richard tapped his folder lightly, drawing the room's focus back. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced smoothly, allow me to add one final detail. Mrs. Grant has amended her will as of this evening. All prior inheritances assigned to Daniel Grant are void. The new beneficiaries, he paused for effect, are charitable foundations dedicated to protecting seniors from abuse and exploitation. The ballroom erupted. Whispers turned into audible exclamations. A woman in the front row clapped once, quickly silenced by her embarrassed husband. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Vanessa, pale and trembling, shrieked, "You can't do that. He's your only son. He's family." "Yes," I said, my voice cool as winter. "And family is supposed to protect, not prey. You mistook my kindness for weakness. Tonight, you learn the difference." The manager stepped forward again, holding the payment notice like a verdict. Final warning, no payment, no party. Vanessa collapsed into a chair, sobbing so loudly it rattled the champagne flutes. Daniel stood frozen, his entire future evaporating before 130 witnesses. And I, calm, resolute, prepared to deliver the final blow. The chandeliers above seemed to hold their breath, casting fractured light across faces that waited, hungry, for the next revelation. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks like war paint gone wrong. Her sobs weren't soft, they were jagged, attention-grabbing, the kind of cries meant to manipulate an audience. Too bad the audience had already picked sides. Daniel still stood there, stiff, pale, his tie hanging loose like a noose he hadn't noticed tightening. He tried again, his voice cracking like an old record. "Mom, maybe we can talk privately. Just you and me, please." "No, Daniel," I cut him off, each syllable sharp enough to leave a scar. "You allowed my humiliation to be public. You will endure the truth the same way." Gasps rippled through the room. Guests leaned closer, not even pretending anymore. Phone cameras glowed like fireflies in the dark, capturing every second for the court of public opinion. Richard, unflappable as ever, laid one last sheet atop the others. And finally, he declared, his voice the steady drumbeat of judgment. Effective immediately, all financial transfers Mrs. Grant has made to sustain Daniel Grant's lifestyle are terminated. That includes rent subsidies, vehicle payments, and credit card debt relief. The words hit Daniel like a hammer. His knees buckled, and he grabbed the edge of a chair, He whispered something under his breath, too soft to hear, but I knew what it was. A prayer to money that would never answer again. I stepped closer, so near I could see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. For years, I saved you quietly, I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. I covered your failures, I softened your landings, but in doing so, I raised a man who believed consequences were optional. Tonight, that ends. Vanessa sprang up again, wild-eyed. You witch, you ruined us. Do you know what you've done? Yes, I said, lifting my chin, letting the room drink in my words. I've given you both the one gift you never had before, accountability. The crowd erupted, some in shocked laughter, others in applause they didn't bother to hide. Even the violinist clapped his bow against his palm. The manager cleared his throat. Decisive now, ladies and gentlemen, unless immediate payment is provided. This celebration is officially over. Chairs scraped. Guests began gathering their coats. And murmurs turned to outright chatter. A wedding had transformed into a public trial, and the verdict was unanimous. Vanessa wailed, Daniel sagged, and the ballroom dissolved into chaos. But just as Richard and I turned to leave, a voice from the back rang out, wait. Mrs. Grant, please don't go. All heads swiveled toward the speaker. The voice pierced through the ballroom's chaos. Clear and trembling, from the far corner, a young woman hurried forward, her heels clicking against the marble like punctuation. It was Emily Carter, my niece, Daniel's younger cousin. She had sat quietly all night, half hidden at a back table, her wide eyes following every eruption like a child at her first fireworks display. Now she pushed through the crowd, her face pale but determined. Aunt Eleanor, she called, her voice cracking, please don't leave yet. I need to say something. The room stilled. Curiosity reined in like horses before a sudden jump. Vanessa's sobs hiccuped into silence. Daniel's head jerked toward Emily, a flash of irritation crossing his face. Emily, this isn't your business, he snapped, his voice hoarse. Yes, it is, she shot back, surprising even herself, because I'd watched this happen for months. And I didn't know how to stop it. I saw the way Vanessa mocked Aunt Eleanor, the way you parroted her words, the way you both schemed. I kept quiet because I thought, maybe you'd come to your senses. But tonight, her gaze swept across the guests. Tonight you crossed a line no one should ever cross. A murmur spread through the crowd, sympathy shifting like a tide. Emily stood tall, trembling but unbroken. Aunt Eleanor, I want you to know, I never agreed with them. I never will. You've always treated me with respect. And I'm ashamed I didn't defend you sooner. Tears pricked at my eyes. Of all the voices I expected to hear tonight, hers was the least likely, and the most needed. Vanessa scoffed, wiping at her streaked face. Oh, please, she's just siding with the rich one now that she knows there's money involved. Emily turned on her, fire sparking where fear had been. Rich or poor, Vanessa, she has something you'll never understand, dignity. And no amount of designer gowns or fake smiles can buy that. The ballroom erupted into applause, small at first, then swelling, hands clapping, voices cheering. Vanessa froze, mouth open, trapped in a spotlight harsher than any chandelier. Daniel muttered, Emily, stop. No, she said, her voice steady now. You stop. You've let greed turn you into someone I barely recognize. But Aunt Eleanor, she's the only one here brave enough to stand against it. I reached for Emily's hand, squeezed it tight. Thank you, sweetheart, I whispered, though the room was silent enough to hear. Vanessa's face twisted, fury and desperation colliding. You'll regret this, all of you, she spat, spinning toward the doors. And just as she did, the ballroom manager stepped forward with a clipboard and a demand, Mrs. Moore. Unless you can provide $53,000 right now, your wedding is over. The ballroom manager's voice cracked like a gavel, firm, unflinching, final. Mrs. Moore, the outstanding balance for tonight's event is $53,000. Unless payment is provided immediately, the wedding is hereby suspended. The words landed like cannon fire. Gasps rolled through the hall. A bridesmaid dropped her bouquet, petals scattered across the parquet like confetti for the dead. Vanessa spun toward him, wild-eyed. You can't be serious. This is my wedding. You can't just cancel it because of paperwork. The manager didn't blink. Ma'am, this isn't about paperwork. It's about payment. Without it, my staff walks. The music stops. And the guests leave hungry. That's not my threat, it's in your contract. He tapped his clipboard for emphasis. Laughter rippled across the room. Cruel and contagious. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some already clutching their handbags like lifeboats. Daniel staggered forward, his voice desperate. Please, sir, we'll fix this. Just give us time. The manager arched a brow. Time? You had months. Tonight ends in minutes. Vanessa's face crumpled into rage. This is all her fault, she screamed, pointing at me, her diamond ring flashing under the lights. She's vindictive, jealous, senile. None of this would be happening if she weren't trying to ruin us. The manager crossed his arms, unimpressed. Lady, your problem isn't her. It's the $53,000 you don't have. The crowd erupted in laughter, this time, loud, unapologetic, cutting. Vanessa's cheeks blazed crimson. Her tiara, abandoned on the floor, was stepped on by a passing waiter with delicious indifference. Daniel turned to me, his voice cracking. Mom, please, you can't humiliate us like this. Think of the family. Think of how this looks. I stepped forward, my heels clicking like punctuation marks. Daniel, you humiliated yourself the moment you let her strike me in front of everyone. You chose this path. Now you can walk it. A hush fell again. My words cut deeper than Richard's documents ever could. Vanessa wailed, collapsing into her chair, gown spilling around her like a defeated storm cloud. Daniel stood beside her, pale, trembling, a man realizing too late that his safety net had been torched. The manager checked his watch. 2 minutes. Pay, or it's over. A waiter dimmed the lights. The band began packing instruments. And whispers surged through the guests. The fairy tale was unraveling faster than anyone imagined, until a familiar voice rose again from the back. Mrs. Grant. May I say something on your behalf? All eyes turned toward Harold Bennett. Every head pivoted toward Harold Bennett, my 70-year-old neighbor, who stood near the back like a sentinel who had been waiting for this moment his whole life. He adjusted his tweed jacket, cleared his throat, and stepped into the spotlight the way only a man with nothing left to prove could. Folks, he began, his gravelly baritone carrying better than the orchestra ever had. I've lived next door to Eleanor for over a decade. And let me tell you something, she's the kind of woman who waters her plants before she eats breakfast. Who bakes cookies for the doorman at Christmas, and who once helped me dig my car out of a snowbank while wearing slippers. Laughter rippled across the ballroom. Even the band stopped packing, bowing their heads to listen. Harold raised a hand. So when I say she doesn't deserve the humiliation she got tonight, you better believe me, that slap you all saw? That wasn't just a hand across her cheek. That was years of greed finally losing patience. And now, he turned, leveling his gaze at Vanessa and Daniel. Now you're shocked she finally fought back? Please. The guests erupted in murmurs of agreement. Some even clapped softly, the kind of applause usually reserved for courtroom witnesses delivering knockout testimony. Vanessa shot up from her chair, her face blotchy and wet. What do you know, old man? You're just her crony. Harold's lips curled into a sly grin. Better a crony than a crook. Laughter boomed, uncontainable this time. Several guests openly applauded. Phones flashed, recording every word, every gesture. Vanessa shrieked, her voice nearly drowned by the roar of the room. Daniel rubbed his temples, his composure unraveling. Uncle Harold, please, this isn't helping. Oh, it's helping, Harold shot back, helping everyone here see the truth. You and your bride tried to strip Eleanor of her dignity, her home, and her independence. You failed, and now you're left naked, not literally. Thank heaven, but financially, socially, and morally. Gasps, chuckles, scattered applause. Vanessa collapsed again, sobbing into her ruined gown. Daniel sagged against the table, unable to fight the current turning against him. I looked at Harold, my chest swelling with gratitude. Thank you, I whispered, though the microphone of silence carried it across the room. He winked. Anytime, Ellie. Somebody had to say it. The manager cleared his throat once more, his patience wearing thin. Ladies and gentlemen, last call. Either payment is made now, or the lights go out. All eyes swung back to Daniel and Vanessa, two figures crumbling under the weight of their own choices. The ballroom manager's words cracked through the air like thunder. Last call. Payment now, or the lights go out. The chandeliers above seemed to flicker in agreement, their golden glow threatening to dim. Guests leaned forward in their seats, anticipation buzzing like static. Daniel looked cornered, like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test he hadn't even studied for. Please, sir, he begged, his voice hoarse. You can't shut this down. We'll find a way. The manager checked his watch with icy calm. You've got 60 seconds, unless you've got 53,000 in your pocket. This party is over. Vanessa shot to her feet, mascara streaking like war paint. Someone help us. We have family here, friends with money. Isn't anyone going to step in? Silence. The same silence that had smothered me earlier when her hand cracked across my face. Only now, it was her who stood isolated, abandoned in her hour of need. A fitting symmetry. One guest coughed politely. Another muttered, "We already gave wedding gifts." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the hall. Nobody reached for their checkbooks. Nobody moved. I stepped forward, my voice slicing clean through the noise. You see, Vanessa, respect is earned, loyalty is cultivated, but greed? Greed leaves you standing alone when the music stops. The crowd clapped, tentative at first. Then louder, steady, undeniable, a full round of applause. Not for the bride, not for the groom, but for me. Vanessa's mouth fell open. Daniel buried his face in his hands. The sound of clapping grew, echoing against the ballroom's marble walls like a verdict. The manager's voice cut through the applause. Time's up. He snapped his fingers. The band stopped cold. Waiters froze mid-step, then began rolling carts toward the kitchen. One by one, chandeliers dimmed until the ballroom stood in half-light, shadows falling across stunned faces. Guests rippled through the guests. Some grabbed their coats. Others reached for phones to capture this once-in-a-lifetime disaster. Richard placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Grant, he murmured, his voice low but firm. I believe we're done here. As we turned toward the exit, Vanessa lunged forward, her voice breaking. Wait, Eleanor, you'll regret this. I swear, you'll regret this. The threat hung in the air, desperate and hollow. And then, another voice rose. Soft but steady. No. Vanessa, the only people who'll regret tonight are you and Daniel. Every head turned to see who had spoken. The voice belonged to none other than Emily Carter. She stepped forward again, her chin lifted higher than her years. The half-light from the dimmed chandeliers gave her face a glow that made her look older. Wiser, almost prophetic. No, Vanessa, Emily repeated, her voice ringing through the hushed ballroom. The only people who will regret tonight are you and Daniel, for mistaking cruelty for strength. And silence for loyalty. The guests erupted in soft applause. Some nodding, some whispering, bravo, under their breath. Even the manager allowed himself a faint smile, arms crossed as if to say, "This kid gets it." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came. Her chest heaved, her fists clenched. But the tide of the room had turned so completely that even she must have felt it pressing her down. Daniel staggered forward, his voice low and broken. "Emily, please, you don't understand. I was trying to protect our future." Emily turned, eyes sharp. By selling your mother's dignity for square footage? By standing silent while your wife assaulted her in front of everyone? Her voice cracked with emotion. But she did not falter. That's not protection, Daniel. That's betrayal. The crowd buzzed louder, murmurs like a storm rolling in. Daniel wilted under the weight of his cousin's truth. His once confident shoulders slumped, his tie dangling like a useless rope. I stepped closer to Emily, my hand brushing her arm. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered, though the microphone of silence carried it across every corner of the ballroom. She gave me a small, sad smile. "It's the least I can do. Tonight, you showed us all what strength really looks like." Richard closed his briefcase with a click that echoed like the closing of a coffin. "Mrs. Grant," he said, offering me his arm, "shall we?" I nodded, ready to leave the wreckage behind. But just as we turned toward the exit, Vanessa shrieked, her voice raw and ragged. "This isn't over. You think you've won, Eleanor, but mark my words, without us, you're nothing, nothing." Her scream bounced off the marble, but it landed hollow. I turned back one last time. My voice calm, measured. Vanessa, I've been underestimated my whole life. And every time, I've come out stronger. Tonight is no different. The only people who are nothing are the ones who mistake greed for love. Gasps. Applause. Some guests even stood, clapping openly now. Vanessa crumpled into her chair. Defeated. Daniel sank beside her. Broken. The doors to the ballroom swung open, letting in the cool night air. As I stepped into the darkness, cameras still flashing behind me, I knew this wasn't just the end of a wedding. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and the city of Boston was about to learn my name. The night air outside the Marblewood Hotel was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the harbor. A row of luxury cars lined the cobblestone street, their polished chrome catching the golden glow of the street lamps. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled chaos inside the ballroom, raised voices, shuffling footsteps, the hollow ring of a world collapsing. I paused on the steps, inhaling deeply. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy with pretense. It tasted sharp, almost electric, like the city itself was applauding my defiance. Reporters had begun to gather, drawn by whispers spilling out of the wedding. Cameras flickered, microphones reached, and voices overlapped. Mrs. Grant, did your daughter-in-law really slap you? Is it true you were financing the wedding? Do you have a statement for the public? Richard placed a protective hand on my shoulder. Ignore them for now. Let's get to the car. But I stopped. For decades, I had kept my life a secret. My voice muted. Tonight had cracked open that silence. Perhaps it was time to let the world hear what a woman like me had to say. I turned to the flashing lights, raising my chin. My voice carried with a steadiness I didn't know I still possessed. Yes, I was humiliated tonight. Yes, my son and his wife tried to strip me of everything I have. But hear me clearly, what they discovered is that appearances can lie. The simple clothes, the old car, the small flower shop job, none of those define me. What defines me is my dignity. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not for sale. The street erupted in applause. Some strangers clapped, others cheered. Even the reporters lowered their microphones for a moment. Stunned, Richard gave me a sidelong look. Half proud, half worried. You realize that was the beginning of something much bigger, don't you? I smiled faintly, tugging my shawl tighter against the wind. Yes, Richard, and for the first time in years, I'm ready. The following morning, headlines across Boston would carry my name, but not everyone would celebrate me because somewhere in that ballroom, Vanessa Dawson was already planning her revenge. Morning sunlight streamed through my curtains, warm and indifferent to the storm it illuminated. I hadn't slept much. My mind replayed every gasp, every camera flash, every tremor in Ethan's voice as if it were etched into my bones. When I stepped into the living room, the newspaper Joseph had left at my door lay waiting like a messenger of fate. The front page headline screamed, "Mother of the groom exposes shocking truth at Marblewood wedding." Below was a photograph of me standing beside Richard, eyes sharp, shoulders squared, with Juliet frozen mid-scream behind us. Other papers followed suit. Boston widow reveals secret fortune, humiliates greedy newlyweds. From wallflower to warrior, how one mother defied the odds. Coffee in hand, I flipped through the pages, half amused, half terrified. My phone vibrated constantly on the table, calls from unknown numbers. Voicemails from journalists. Messages from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. The story had gone national overnight. But tucked between the praise and fascination was a single venomous line in the Beacon Daily. Sources close to the Dawson family suggest Mrs. Grant suffers from paranoia and emotional instability, raising questions about her judgment. I froze, the words crawling across my skin like insects. Vanessa's fingerprints were all over it. She was striking back, faster than I had expected. Joseph knocked lightly before letting himself in, his familiar smile trying to mask his concern. The city's buzzing. "Clara, you've become a symbol overnight." "A symbol?" I asked, lowering the paper. "Yes, a symbol of every parent who's been disrespected, every elder who's been silenced. But symbols attract enemies too." I set the paper down slowly, my heartbeat steadying into something sharper, colder. Then it's time I stop reacting to their games and start leading the board. while the Dawsons schemed to paint me as unstable. I was already preparing the first move in a battle they could never anticipate. By noon, the phone hadn't stopped ringing. Television producers wanted interviews. Advocacy groups wanted me to speak at their events. Lawyers I'd never heard of offered support, which was just another word for business. But beneath the noise, I felt the quiet pulse of Vanessa Dawson's counterattack. Her family had wealth, influence, and connections in the city. They could turn gossip into weapons, whispers into verdicts. If I let their version of the story spread, the truth would rot before it had a chance to breathe. I called Richard. He answered on the first ring. "Clara, I was about to call you. The Dawsons are moving fast. Vanessa's already speaking with a columnist at the Herald. She's trying to frame you as senile and reckless." I took a slow breath. "Then we can't waste time. Richard, it's time to open the vault." There was silence on the line. Then, in his gravelly voice, "Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no putting the mask back on." "Yes," I said firmly. "Last night was just the prelude. Today, they'll learn who I truly am." An hour later, Richard arrived with 2 leather briefcases, their locks gleaming like secrets itching to be set free. Inside lay decades of meticulously hidden documents, investment portfolios, property deeds, philanthropic donations made under discreet trusts. Proof not only of my wealth, but of my careful, deliberate choices to live modestly while quietly shaping lives behind the scenes. Joseph whistled when he saw the stacks of papers. "Clara, this is enough to bury every lie they try to spin about you." I closed the case with a snap. "Not just bury them, Joseph. Redefine me, on my terms, not theirs." The plan was simple: one exclusive interview, one broadcast that would eclipse Vanessa's poisonous whispers before they could take root. That evening, under the blazing lights of Channel 7 News, I would sit before the city and reveal the truth the Dawsons feared most. The Channel 7 studio buzzed like a beehive. Technicians adjusted cameras, makeup artists dabbed at my cheeks, and producers shuffled papers with a nervous urgency that told me they knew tonight's broadcast was more than a routine interview, it was an event. I sat in the green room, Richard on one side, Joseph on the other. My hands rested on my lap, calm but ready. On the television mounted in the corner, a teaser rolled across the screen. "Exclusive tonight. Clara Grant speaks out. The truth behind the Marblewood wedding scandal." The producer, a young woman with headset wires trailing like ivy, leaned in. "Mrs. Grant, when the host asks about your financial situation, are you willing to go on record with numbers? Assets?" I smiled faintly. "If I don't, Vanessa will control the story. So yes, every detail. Let's give the Dawsons a front row seat to the truth." Richard chuckled, though his eyes betrayed pride. "Remind me never to play poker against you." Moments later, I was guided onto the set. The studio lights were merciless, turning every gesture into theater, every word into evidence. Across from me sat Elaine Porter, Boston's most respected journalist, known for her sharp tongue and sharper mind. She adjusted her glasses, smiled politely, and began. "Mrs. Grant, last night you were humiliated at your own son's wedding. Today, you are the most talked about woman in Boston. Why don't you start by telling us, who is the real Clara Grant?" I leaned forward, my voice steady, measured. "The real Clara Grant," I said, "is a woman who let people mistake kindness for weakness for far too long. But last night, when my daughter-in-law slapped me in front of 130 guests, that mask came off. And tonight, I'm here to make sure it never goes back on." The room went still. Even Elaine paused, pen hovering mid-air. The cameras zoomed closer, catching every flicker in my eyes. And then, with the nation watching, I reached for Richard's briefcase, the moment that would turn whispers into thunder. The leather briefcase sat on the table like a silent drum, its polished brass lock gleaming under the studio lights. My fingers rested on it for a breathless second, the air in the studio thick with anticipation. Elaine raised a brow, her tone edged with curiosity. "Mrs. Grant, what's in there?" I clicked open the lock. The sound cracked through the silence like a gavel. Slowly, I lifted the lid, revealing stacks of documents neatly bound, each stamped with official seals. "These," I said, sliding the first file toward her, Are the bank records showing consistent transfers of $4,500 a month to my son and his wife? Payments they believed came from work bonuses and tax refunds. In reality, they came from me. A collective gasp swept through the studio crew. Elaine leaned forward, scanning the papers with widened eyes. Next, I continued, pulling out property deeds. Is the downtown office building generating $50,000 a month in rental income? And here, the beach house in Cape Cod. Bought in cash, all held in trusts my late husband and I created decades ago. Elaine exhaled slowly, as if the weight of the revelations pressed against her chest. Mrs. Grant, you're telling us the woman who works at a flower shop and drives an old sedan is, in fact, a multimillionaire? I allowed a small smile. Yes, because wealth should serve dignity, not vanity. I chose to live simply. But make no mistake, the Dawsons knew nothing of this. They assumed I was powerless. And that was their greatest mistake. The cameras caught every syllable, every flicker of defiance in my expression. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. But just as the audience sat in stunned silence, Elaine leaned in with a sharper question, one that would pierce deeper than money ever could. The leather briefcase sat on the table like a silent drum, its polished brass lock gleaming under the studio lights. My fingers rested on it for a breathless second, the air in the studio thick with anticipation. Elaine raised a brow, her tone edged with curiosity. Mrs. Grant, what's in there? I clicked open the lock. The sound cracked through the silence like a gavel. Slowly, I lifted the lid, revealing stacks of documents neatly bound, each stamped with official seals. These, I said, sliding the first file toward her, are the bank records showing consistent transfers of $4,500 a month to my son and his wife. Payments they believed came from work bonuses and tax refunds. In reality, they came from me. A collective gasp swept through the studio crew. Elaine leaned forward, scanning the papers with widened eyes. Next, I continued, pulling out property deeds. Is the downtown office building generating $50,000 a month in rental income? And here, the beach house in Cape Cod. Bought in cash, all held in trusts my late husband and I created decades ago. Elaine exhaled slowly, as if the weight of the revelations pressed against her chest. Mrs. Grant, you're telling us the woman who works at a flower shop and drives an old sedan is, in fact, a multimillionaire? I allowed a small smile. Yes, because wealth should serve dignity, not vanity. I chose to live simply. But make no mistake, the Dawsons knew nothing of this. They assumed I was powerless. And that was their greatest mistake. The cameras caught every syllable, every flicker of defiance in my expression. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. But just as the audience sat in stunned silence, Elaine leaned in with a sharper question, one that would pierce deeper than money ever could. The question hung in the studio like smoke. Do you still love your son? For a moment, I forgot about the cameras, the bright lights, the audience waiting across the country. All I saw was Ethan, 7 years old, chasing fireflies in the backyard, 16, nervously adjusting his tie before prom, 22, hugging me after his college graduation. My heart ached with the weight of memory. I blinked back the sting in my eyes and leaned closer to the microphone. Yes, I said, my voice breaking just enough to betray the truth. I will always love Ethan. He is my son, my blood, my flesh. But love is not a blank check. Love does not mean allowing him, or anyone, to strip me of my dignity. Love does not mean sacrificing who I am just to make him comfortable in his mistakes. Elaine's expression softened, her pen forgotten on the desk. I love my son, I repeated, firmer now, but I will not love him at the cost of losing myself. If Ethan ever finds the courage to face his actions, if he ever rediscovers the values I raised him with, then my door will be open. Until then, love will have to live at a distance. The studio was silent except for the hum of the lights. One of the cameramen discreetly wiped his eyes. Elaine cleared her throat, visibly moved. Mrs. Grant, she said quietly, you've turned your pain into something powerful. Thank you, for your honesty. And for your courage. The red light on the main camera blinked off. The interview was over, but I knew the real broadcast was just beginning, the one that would ripple across living rooms, families, and dinner tables all over the country. Yet even as applause filled the studio, my phone buzzed in my purse, Ethan's name glowing on the screen for the first time since the wedding. The studio was still buzzing when I slipped into the hallway, applause echoing faintly behind me. Richard and Joseph trailed close, protective shadows at my side. But my focus narrowed to the vibration in my purse, the glow of a single name I thought I'd never see again. Ethan. My heart clenched. For days, his silence had been a louder punishment than any insult Juliet could hurl. Now, with the world watching, he had chosen this moment. I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. Ethan? On the other end came a shaky breath. Then his voice, hoarse, cracked, like a man standing in the rubble of his own life. Mom, what did you do? I closed my eyes. The question wasn't about the documents, the money, or the ballroom spectacle. It was about me reclaiming the power he thought I'd never use. I told the truth, I said softly. There was silence, broken only by muffled noise in the background, Juliet's sharp voice demanding answers. Ethan lowered his voice, as if hiding from her. Everything's falling apart. The lease, the credit cards, the wedding bills. Juliet's furious. She says it's all your fault. I leaned against the cool studio wall, feeling the weight of decades press on my shoulders. Ethan, it isn't my fault you chose greed over gratitude. It isn't my fault you stood silent when I was humiliated. You made those choices. Now you're living with them. His breath quickened, a mix of panic and despair. But Mom, we have nothing. What are we supposed to do? My grip tightened on the phone. For a split second, the mother in me wanted to rush in, to fix it, to protect him. But the woman I had become, the woman who walked out of that ballroom, refused. You'll do what every grown adult must do. Ethan, I said firmly, you'll learn, you'll work, you'll rebuild, and if you ever want my love again, you'll start by earning my respect. The line went silent, then a soft click. He had hung up. Richard's hand brushed my shoulder. You okay? I exhaled slowly, my heart aching but resolute. No, but I'm free. And yet, I didn't know that Juliet had already begun her next move, a plan not just to smear my name, but to take me down in court. By the time Richard drove me home, the city had already swallowed my interview whole. Social media blazed with clips. Hashtags bearing my name trended nationwide, and strangers from places I'd never been sent messages of solidarity. But not everyone was applauding. On my doorstep, a thick white envelope waited like a snake coiled in the dark. I picked it up, my stomach tightening at the embossed Dawson family crest stamped across the flap. Inside lay a crisp summons, legal jargon screaming from the page. Petition for competency hearing, in Ray Clara Grant. I read the words twice, the letters blurring as anger surged hot and sharp. Vanessa wasn't just whispering rumors now, she was weaponizing the courts, daring to brand me unfit to manage my own affairs. Joseph swore under his breath when I handed him the document. They're going for blood. Richard rubbed his temples, scanning the lines. This isn't just petty retaliation. Clara, if a judge sides with them, they could seize control of your finances, your properties, everything. For a moment, fear pressed against my ribs, cold and suffocating. But then I remembered Juliet's shriek in the ballroom, Vanessa's smug glances, Ethan's hollow silence. They had mistaken my restraint for fragility. They thought this paper could undo me. I straightened, fire lighting my veins. Then we fight. I'll meet them in court. And this time, I won't just defend myself, I'll expose every lie they've told, every scheme they've plotted. Joseph grinned fiercely. That's the Clara I know. Richard closed the folder with a snap. Then let's prepare for war. Little did I know, the trial ahead would not only test my fortune, it would tear open every secret the Dawson family had tried to bury. The next morning, my apartment became a war room. Richard spread documents across the dining table, bank statements, property titles, investment records, each piece a shield against the Dawsons' attack. Joseph brewed endless coffee, his gruff humor lightening the air. If Vanessa thinks she can outmaneuver us, she's in for a surprise. I've played poker with sharks meaner than her. But this wasn't a card game. It was my life. Richard tapped one file with his pen. Clara, the Dawsons will argue you're irrational, that your public outburst at the wedding proves declining judgment. We need to counter with proof of your clarity, your competence, your control. I nodded, pushing aside the ache that rose at the memory of Juliet's slap. Then let's give them more than proof. Let's give them a story they can't twist. Joseph leaned in. Meaning? Meaning, I said. We won't just show that I can manage my affairs. We'll show that they can't manage theirs. Their debts, their manipulations, their lies, dragged into the light for the whole city to see. Richard allowed himself a small smile. You don't just want to win. You want to scorch the earth. I met his gaze steadily. No, I want to plant new ground. For too long, people like me, women of age, widows, mothers, are treated like easy prey. If I have to burn the Dawsons' lies to ash to protect others, so be it. The room went quiet, the weight of my words settling like armor. Joseph raised his mug. To justice, then, and to making Vanessa Dawson regret underestimating you. We clinked cups, not champagne, but coffee laced with defiance. Yet even as we prepared our case, Vanessa was already pulling strings, summoning witnesses who would twist the truth of that night into daggers aimed at my heart. Vanessa moved quickly, too quick for dignity. She began calling in favors, old classmates, a few socialites who owed her lunches, even a neighbor who'd once seen me look confused on the stoop and happily agreed to say she'd noticed a decline. Their statements arrived like paper darts, tidy, rehearsed, and cruel. But we had something their whisper campaign lacked: context. For every shaky witness they produced, Richard had documents, timestamps, bank records, receipts, and character witnesses, neighbors, clients from my flower shop, who smiled when they spoke of my memory and clarity. And Harold, who kept his testimony simple and devastating. I see her day in, day out. She's sharp as a tack. In the waiting room before the competency hearing, I sat with Emily and Joseph. A group of volunteers from the Senior Advocacy Center trickled in, people I'd barely met who had traveled to show solidarity. Their faces were ordinary and brave. That was our secret weapon, the quiet, stubborn dignity of people who understood what it meant to be underestimated and still survive. The courthouse smelled of old coffee and newer fear. Vanessa's lawyer moved with the practiced swagger of someone used to buying outcomes. He presented witnesses who spoke of unusual emotional outbursts, carefully edited accounts of that night where context was a liability. Richard dismantled each claim, piece by piece, witty and surgical. At one point, the judge, a woman with a reputation for cutting through drama, leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Grant, your restraint in the face of this spectacle is remarkable. Why not simply give in to avoid this?" I met the judge's eye. Because silence was the soil in which their greed grew. If I give it water, it will drown others. The courtroom murmured. Someone choked back a sob. A reporter typed like a piano player with purpose. The verdict would not be handed down that day. Outside, cameras waited, and the Dawsons were already planning their next move. But the ground had shifted. Weeks of hearings followed like chapters in a very long, uncomfortable book. Depositions, forensic accountants, character testimonies. Each page piled up until Vanessa's tidy narrative looked like a house of cards in a hurricane. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the cross-examination of the Dawson patriarch. The man who'd smiled politely while his family plotted. Richard's questions were precise, surgical. The truth, financial mismanagement, loans taken under dubious circumstances, an attempted plan to suggest neighbors file competency concerns, unspooled like a sloppy confession. As the evidence mounted, Vanessa's allies grew quieter. Some withdrew their statements. Others looked embarrassed on television. The public's sympathy shifted with a speed that felt like a small miracle. Social media that had earlier dunked on me now brimmed with stories of other seniors who had been taken advantage of, and people who shared their pain. My inbox filled with the names of those who needed help. Finally, the judge spoke. Her voice was firm, tempered by law and some compassion. She denied the petition for a competency hearing and instead ordered a full review of the Dawsons' financial practices. She also admonished any party who had sought to weaponize the courts for personal gain. Walking out of the courthouse that day, the press flocked to me, not to celebrate, but to ask what I intended to do with the attention. I thought of Joseph and Harold and Emily, of the seniors who had written to me in tears. I thought of the quiet work that heals and rebuilds. I felt, for the first time since the slap, that rage had become purpose. The public victory was only the beginning. There was rebuilding to do, not for me, but for those who had no one to call when the vultures came. 2 years later, my mornings begin with sunlight and soil instead of dread. The Grant Foundation for Senior Dignity, a modest name, born of stubborn practicality, has 3 community centers where people get free legal counseling, financial literacy classes, and, crucially, a place to be heard. Emily runs education programs, Harold gives talks with theatrical flourish, Joseph organizes outreach. Richard still grumbles about the time commitment but smiles when a family's case closes in favor of the elder. I write, sometimes furiously, sometimes with a soft pen, books, op-eds, guides. We've helped hundreds reclaim assets and, more importantly, self-respect. Did I ever make peace with Daniel? Not fully. He called sporadically, one voicemail after the first winter, a tentative text when his son was born. The last time we spoke, he told me he was learning to manage his money and his life. Whether that becomes a steadier truth remains to be seen. Forgiveness is a long road, and sometimes the map shows only the next step. As for Vanessa, the public fallout reshaped her life. She remarried quietly years later, in a small ceremony lacking the fanfare of her first attempt. Pride is a fragile thing, she learned it cost more than a tiara. In me, I learned that dignity is both armor and currency. I discovered that the quiet life I chose was not a lie, it was a choice. Showing the world what I had done didn't make me less private, it made me responsible for others. I had kept silence to protect, but I broke that silence to protect more. Kindness is not weakness. Protection without boundaries is harm. Love does not require self-erasure. When someone mistakes your quiet for consent, you have the right to teach them the price of their assumption. Standing up for yourself can protect a generation. Reclaiming dignity often changes lives beyond your own.